Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey, welcome to the Family Ministry Podcast. This is Nick, and if this is your first time listening, this podcast is all about helping children's ministry leaders, youth ministry leaders, next-gen family pastors lead in their ministries. We talk about things beyond that. In fact, the last episode, we had some great conversations about church strategy overall, interviewing two co-pastors of a church and talked about some of the shifts they're making strategically coming out of the pandemic. What does that look like? But usually our conversations center around children's ministry, youth ministry, or both. And in this episode, I talk with Heidi Hensley all about volunteer appreciation and new beginnings. This interview was actually done before the pandemic, which is crazy. I would normally never hang on to an interview for that long. Usually the longest an interview sits before it's aired is maybe 2 months, at most. But what happened was the pandemic hit. A lot of this conversation was about in-person gatherings to celebrate your volunteers, and that wasn't happening for a long time. And even after churches started gathering in person for services, if your church was like mine and many others, there's still a lot of in-person types of gatherings that you weren't doing. We did a huge volunteer party right before the pandemic. I mean, literally, I think it was a week before or 2 weeks before or something like that. And, we have had no conversations about something like that since. But now a lot of churches are in that place again. Even if it's not a large gathering, you could gather your volunteers to celebrate, appreciate them, and all of that. So as you listen to this episode, it's going to be great, helpful content. Just know that it was recorded right back in March of 2020 before the pandemic. Fortunately, what we talk about is always true. Volunteer appreciation, doing events, notes, gifts, getting 100% volunteer training attendance, all of that kind of stuff. So before we jump into that episode, remember that you can get the links and notes and all that at nickblevins.com/episode 241. And I've been talking about Clearstream, which is a text message service provider for churches on the podcast the last couple of weeks. If you don't currently have a text message solution, a mass texting solution in your ministry, in your church, check out Clearstream. You got to have one. Nothing else gets a 97% open rate. Not Facebook, Instagram, certainly not email. Well, and actually email's better than social media, but nothing gets a 97% open rate like text does. So you need a mass texting service and a strategy to go along with that. Maybe you do have a service, but Clearstream would be a better one. So if you're interested, check out nickblevins.com/text. They work with thousands of churches worldwide. They integrate with things your church already uses, like maybe MailChimp or, we use Church Community Builder. Churches use Rock RMS as a church management system or planning center, and they integrate with all of those things and have all the features you would expect in a texting service, like short codes and guest follow-up workflows, the ability to mass text or even have two-way communication and personalized messaging and all that. They're a great company, great team. I've enjoyed getting to know them. And if you're interested in that, check out nickblevins.com/text. Now listen to this conversation with Heidi Hensley all about volunteer appreciation. Well, today we have Heidi Hensley back on the podcast. Welcome back, Heidi.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So you've been on before, and if people haven't listened to that episode, they should. We talked tough topics. You actually talked about some things that a lot of people wrestle with, but don't necessarily talk about in public. So I appreciated that. But if anybody didn't listen to that or isn't familiar with you, kind of introduce yourself again.
Yeah. So my name is Heidi Hensley. I'm the kids director or kids pastor at Shadow Mountain Church in San Diego, California. I'm down here with my husband of 25 years and our boys who this year are graduating high school, and the oldest finished his bachelor's. It's kind of a fun, exciting year.
Yeah. Lots of change.
Lots of change.
That's right. And money and expenses, I'm sure.
Yes.
So, and am I right? We haven't even talked about this, but your husband works for the church as well?
He does. He is retired law enforcement, and so he is pastor's personal protection guy and our director of safety. So, yeah,
that's awesome. We should maybe have him on once. Do you guys work together a lot in terms of safety, security policies within kids ministry too?
Oh, yeah. He obviously, having the law enforcement background, he was a SWAT team member for many years and brought that to the table. And then we basically sat and converted that to look like a kids policy. And so I often will proudly say that I think I have the safest kids ministry in the world. But but yeah, we work on that kind of stuff frequently. And I know he's done some different podcasts with Kid Check and different places like that feature safety practices.
Yeah, I think he was on Tom Bump's Kids Ministry
Yeah.
Collective podcast. And I was thinking then, I was like, okay, we were working on getting you back on, and I was thinking we're going to have to get him on too. So maybe we'll
He
make
would
that
love
happen.
that.
Yeah, that'd be great. So you transitioned to this church just a few years ago, Shadow Mountain Community Church. Tell us a little bit about this church, and then we'll even talk a little bit about the kids ministry.
Yeah, so the church is led by Dr. David Jeremiah. I've been here about 3 years and was brought in after kind of a legacy of leaders. They had the same leader for many, many years, and then just went through this, I think like most churches do, went through a leadership change that just caused massive amounts of turnover. So when I came in, things felt very disheveled. Not that it was disorganized per se, but it was more so that people didn't really know. They didn't really know who was in charge. It was lots of confusion, not a whole lot of communication. And it really has been a season of coming in that first year. And the first year, my goal was to win over and earn the trust of the people I had the privilege of leading. And, it was a sweet season. And now we've kind of made it clear that we are all on the same team. And we are in the process of building. One of the exciting things that I know you and I talked about a little bit was watching this ministry come in and having this feel of almost that it was just a task at church to this is now a community, it's a family, it's a thriving group of adults who's excited to teach kids about Christ. And we've watched our numbers grow. So we've gone up about 300 over the past 3 years. And so it's fast growing, fast moving. And, right now it is an exciting place to be. So I am super excited about it, but we're at a legacy church. Lots of people love Dr. J. And so we see lots of different people from different ages and stages come to us.
Mm-hmm. And it's a multi-site church? Yes.
Yeah, we are multi-site and, multi-language, really. We have 5 campuses that are English speaking. We have 5 campuses that are Spanish speaking, an Arabic campus and an Iraqi campus as well.
Wow. That's amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And we could talk about what that looks like for kids ministry too, but big picture, what is, we'll talk about your transition there, but to give us a picture of what kids ministry is like, what is it like? What's the weekly programming kind of look like at Shadow Mountain?
Yeah, weekly programming when I got here was initially just, they had gone to the one service format. But the reality is that didn't fit the culture of the church. So that was one of the first things that we altered. And we went back to a very traditional Sunday school model. So we have 3 services. We have a 5 p.m. service, which is called our Live at 5 service. Like most churches, it's our more casual, contemporary service. And for that service in kids ministry, we run the large group, small group model. The next morning, you will have a 9 a.m. service, which is our Sunday school model. Kids are taken to their elementary classes and basically operate in that room for the whole hour. At the end of that hour, if that child is being picked up, parents pick up in the room. And after a certain point of time, those kids are taken back downstairs to the large group format. And the reason we do that is we actually invite families to stay for 2 services. Whether you are taking place in an adult Bible study or just serving, we would love to have your kids for 2 services. And so we heavily stress biblical history with, of course, life application in it in that 9 a.m. hour. And then we do something that complements that teaching in the 10:45 hour in the large group, small group format. So if you're a parent and you come on Sunday, you could drop off at 8:30 a.m. and then you come back at 12:30 and pick your kid up right back in that room. We've transported them with all the places they need to go. And they've had a great time, and hopefully you've gotten plugged in somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Lots of logistics there then with
Yeah.
2 things and moving them and all that kind of stuff, which is interesting for sure. And then midweek you do Awana?
Midweek we do Awana. I'm an Awana kid, so I have a big heart for Awana. And when I came here, one of the most exciting things was when Dr. Jeremiah looked at me and said, we have one of the most thriving Awana programs in Southern California. And I was so excited. And I got there that first night and realized he was not kidding. We have about 600 kids who come to Awana, and it is kind of everybody in our area. There's lots of our own church kids who come. There's some unchurched kids who come. There are kids from other churches who come. And our volunteer draw is the same. We have made some great friends with people from various smaller churches in our county who actually come and serve on our Wednesday nights. But it is a very volunteer-driven program, and we'll see close to a one-on-one ratio. It's not quite that deep. I would say it's more 2-to-1, and so you're sitting really in that 300-ish mark for volunteers for that group, and it's dynamic. It's fun to be part of.
Yeah, and I think you said 600 some in Awana, 800 to 900 on the weekends. So it's really close. Like the size there.
Yeah,
you're running two very large, children's ministry things. Because you said that's one of the best volunteer ministries in the church is Awana. Do you feel like, because I'm sure this is a tension a lot of people face, and you could replace Awana with anything else, any other service in the program. Is there a tension between trying to staff both well, or has that worked out, fairly well since you've been there?
There's a little bit of attention, and there's a little bit of crossover. The beautiful thing that they had never done, so it's kind of a perk and kind of a downside, is Awana was kind of its own silo. It was its own ministry, even though it was part of children's ministry before I got here. So the two didn't really have a whole lot of crossover. The downside of that is Awana didn't feel as supported as they could have. And so we've worked to change that and made sure that, hey, our arms are around you too within children's ministry. The upside of that is they weren't burning out the same people who served at everything, because it really draws a different crowd and kind of leader. Our Awana leaders, they're just all about sitting with a child one-on-one and going through their scriptures and going through everything. Whereas our weekend volunteers are more of an entry point place other than our teachers. But I think that the door is a little bit broader to step in on weekends. And yeah, so they've come together, but I think the tension is gone.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. And there's always, let's face it, there's always a tension with recruiting volunteers in the church. There's a bunch of other ministries they could serve in too. But when you lead both, you can sometimes have that tension of, okay, where am I going to put more emphasis, or which one's doing well, or are they both doing well? Are they both needing, like that could be a challenge for sure. Now, and maybe that was one of the things, but anybody that's kind of coming to a new role, and I know it's been a few years, but you were at a different church when we last spoke. Were there any surprises or challenges or things that that came up that you could speak to that might even be a help to people who are listening? Maybe because maybe they're new in a role. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think when I got here, I don't think it was surprising. I kind of knew it. But I think any church you enter is going to possess this on any basis. No matter how healthy the ministry is, it's going to be there, because transition is scary, especially for people who attend your church, parents, volunteers. You're the newbie coming in. They don't know a whole lot about you unless you grew up in that church, which is probably not likely. But when I came in, there was a lack of community and a lack of trust. And it was because there had been some changes superimposed without basically consulting anybody or anything like that. And so for me, when I stepped in, the first thing I did was just ask for a round table. And it was this moment to just put people in a room. And I don't know that I would recommend this for everybody. I was comfortable in that moment. But I simply invited them to dinner and said, ask me anything, and let's talk about the future of this ministry. And what I heard from them was that they felt like they hadn't been heard. And I think anytime there is a transition, people are afraid that somebody new is coming in with their own agenda. And if the first move you can make is, hey, let's do this as a team. Let's find common ground and get into this together and pray with one another and agree on where this vision is going. I think it's the best thing you can do. And I think anybody in transition, there's going to be some level of that need. And it's low-hanging fruit. It's an easy thing to do. It puts you in the hot seat. For me, that meeting was about 2.5 hours. And they fired some questions and we had a great time. And I made a whole bunch of friends as we left the room.
That's great.
Yeah.
Did you feel like, because you said you tried to spend that early part, that first year, building that trust and getting to know people and all that. Did you feel like that was a year was a good time? And then maybe year two is when you started maybe doing some things, maybe making changes?
Yeah. So the only thing I changed in the first year was anything that could compromise the safety or the message. So, for example, when I got there, our kids building is kind of my husband calls it a tactical nightmare. It's got like 6 different entrances. It's got an elevator access and a slide access. And so the first thing that we did was secured that and made it safe to where parents have to come in one entrance and exit through one entrance, preferably. That was a change that I made within the first year because it compromised the safety of our kids. The curriculum, we went back to the structure of Sunday school, large group, small group combination. We went back to that because we felt like it executed the message better. But those are the only 2 changes, big changes, that I made in the first year. And it was in that roundtable that I told them. They said, what are you going to change first? And I said, well, the first thing I need to do is I need to learn the culture of Shadow Mountain. I need to understand who you are before we change anything, because what works at Bayside or Quail Lakes, where I was before, may not work here with your culture. And I did express that the only 2 things I would change are things that compromise the message to kids or the safety of kids. And we all agreed that those were good ideas.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, they sound like 2 things. It's because you even mentioned earlier that the change back to that model with Sunday school largely was something what the church wanted. So that, that wasn't going to be a hard one to push through. And then safety, sometimes people don't like when they lose some convenience or something. But other than that, it's hard to, it's hard for people to argue against like common sense safety measures. You know what I mean? They kind of
it's kind of funny that we had an older gentleman who was not a fan of the newly locked doors, and that he had to go because our main entrance is the furthest entrance. I know that. And so we got him in the routine, and I sat him down and explained why over a cup of coffee. I said, this is why. This is some of the stuff I've had happen in my ministry. I've actually had kids attempted kidnappings in ministry before in Stockton. And as soon as he understood the why, he was all about it. And if you touched that locked door and tried to come in it, you would get the full spiel from him, because he was now our biggest advocate of the change. So, it's just communication.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I know one thing when we were talking about what we could discuss, you mentioned you'd had a volunteer appreciation recently, and I thought, well, yeah, let's talk about that. Most church leaders probably feel like they don't do that well enough. And so I'd love to talk all about volunteer appreciation, but what did that, because you did some type of a gathering or an event or something like that, right? What did that look like?
It looked like the Grammys. So we thought, so since I've been here, just to give you a little brief history, since I've been here, our volunteer appreciations have been part of our trainings. So they've been one and the same. So it's this whole concept of come, we're going to feed you, we're going to play some games on stage, have a fun event, maybe recognize a few people and celebrate where we've come. And then we would move into the training portion. Well, anytime you're appreciating someone, when you tag work to it, it doesn't feel like an appreciation. Was kind of what we were getting from our people. So we've decided to separate the 2. The other reason for that is we would do it large for our summer program because we'll have 1,000 volunteers in our summer program. But when we did it for our Sunday school training, it wasn't nearly as grand because it's only for 200 or 300 people. And so we thought, well, we want everybody to have the same experience. We want everybody to feel equally as loved and celebrated. So we've separated everything and decided to go once a year. We're going to do a volunteer appreciation that celebrates every corner of children's ministry that you can serve in. And for us, that's everything from Awana to Summer Blast to our venues to our prayer ministry, just everything. And it looked like the Grammys. We had fancy cars parked out front with a red carpet. The invitation was black tie, but it was black tie as you interpret that. So if fancy for you is your good flannel, we want you to come in that. If fancy for you is a sequin ball gown, we want you to come in that. And we had everybody in everything. And, they came in, we had paparazzi taking their picture. They came into a nice sit down dinner that was not pizza, which is awesome. And, they had dinner, and then we came up with, in our ministry, we are Shadow Mountain Kids, and part of our logo has a rocket on it. And so we came up, it's the annual Rocket Awards. And we basically created an acrylic award and recognized somebody from every corner of our ministry. And then we have a man, Mr. Ray, who earned our Legacy Award. And he has been serving in our ministry for 44 years. And it's just one of those classy moments where you call him up, you announce how long he's been serving, the whole room stands up and they applaud, and you could just see on their faces that they felt so loved and so special. And then we sent them on their way. And it really was just a night all about them.
Now, I'd love to ask a few questions about that.
Yeah.
It seems like that was the first time you've done something like that in a while, like you said. I mean, maybe there's some other versions, or it was mixed into training, things like that. Because a lot of things I know leaders will wrestle with would be doing something like that would be awesome, but they're trying to figure out, do we put a lot of budget, money, and time and energy into one big thing like that, or do you spread it out with other things? And obviously, if you can, the answer is yes. Try to do both. But how did you feel about doing the one big thing? And I'm sure it was a big investment of hours and budget and all that.
Honestly, for us, the most expensive part of it was the dinner itself. We have some men in our church. It was using our resources. We have some men in our church that have those classic cars, and we just asked them, we told them what it was for and asked if they would come and just park, and we got a red carpet. The catered dinner was probably the most expensive thing. I mean, the award is something that we created and can continue to create for years to come. The multimedia stuff, I have kind of an easy hand in that. My son just graduated and his degrees, cinematography type stuff. So he created that kind of stuff for us. But so, I mean, the cost of the event was grand. But what we did is we sat down and we said, okay, how much do we spend? And we learned that we spend about $4 to $5 per volunteer for Christmas. We spend, on those little trinkety gifts that you give them. We spend $15 on our coordinators for Summer Blast. We spend $3 on our volunteers, whatever. We did the math, and it came out actually less than what this event costed. And so we'll probably still do some small things throughout the year because I still have money in that budget. But the response from our people, because that was the question I had too, are they going to feel like when Summer Blast ends or when Awana ends that, oh, well, they didn't get their little treat? And many of them came up and said, you know what, we don't need stuff. This is what we need. We need people to tell us that what we're doing matters. And we felt like movie stars tonight. And that was the consistent feedback we got. So I think it made more of an impact than even we were prepared for.
Did you gave out awards and kind of celebrated them that way? What else was included in, like the program of part of the event? Like, did you cast vision in some way, encourage in some way? Like, was there an upfront piece to that?
So we spent the past 3 or 4 months taking pictures of them that they didn't know we were taking. So instead of, when you have a photographer roam through your ministry, they often focus your photos on the kids. And instead we zoomed in on Christine reading with a child or Ray praying with a child. And you can tell the photo is focused on the adult in that scenario. Someone teaching, someone leading worship. And as they ate dinner, that slideshow was playing. And it really was one of those things that they got to see. It was more about look at where you have invested. Let's stop and celebrate how much you poured into this ministry rather than looking forward. We're very visionary in our trainings. And I know that our people, we have almost 100% attendance in our trainings. So I know that they'll get that. But for us, this was really about let's pause and turn around and look at where we've come from and celebrate that moment. The other thing that we did for them, so we went through the evening, did the dinner, a little funny intro with some hosts, the awards, And then after the awards, we had an illusionist, Matt Adams, come and just do a fun show for them. So they really did feel like it was this very fancy night out.
That's good.
Yeah.
I want to ask more about appreciation, but you said you get a pretty good attendance at trainings. How do you think that is? Like, most people hearing that would think, I don't get that. I've asked it in lots of settings before, in a breakout or whatever, and 60% would be good. 70% would be good. Like 40 would be normal, I think is what I hear. So just any quick tips there before we talk more about appreciation?
Quick tips for volunteer attendance. Students attending trainings is mandatory for us. You must, if you're a student, you must attend a training in order to serve in our ministry. That's just kind of a required. If you're going to serve in our summer program, because things change from year to year, we offer 3 different trainings, and we require that you attend one. Because that precedent has been set, people have already, that's just become the culture. But I think on the flip side of that, the reason we've retained the amount that we have is because we are crazy honoring about time. We are big about not wasting time. When I say this training starts at 9 a.m., you can guarantee that I'm going to be out on that stage at 9 a.m. We're not late. And then when I say it's over at 11:30, we're walking out usually at 11:20. So that has been the way we've kind of created the culture of, we're going to be super prompt. We're going to be intentional. It's going to be useful. It's not going to be a waste of your time. You will learn something new. And then because we plan that is where we cast vision. People are always wanting to hear what the next thing is. And so that's the spice that kind of coats it all, because they want to know that. And we won't tell anyone, down to the color. We change the color of our volunteer t-shirt every fall. And that's like the big reveal is at fall training, and nobody knows until that training. And it seems ridiculous, but we know how our volunteers are with their shirts. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you have the history too. I mean, that's what's helped, I imagine, as well. As like, it's expected, they can look forward to it. You mentioned the other type of training. There's multiple options that, again, probably helps, with attendance for sure.
Yeah.
So back to appreciation. With your experience leading, you've done it a number of different ways. What would you say to other Kidmin leaders about the importance of volunteer appreciation? We just talked about some of the practical ideas you used and how you've done it, but I do think it's something that's like overlooked. And so what would you say to leaders listening about the importance of it, and, regardless of how you do it?
Yeah. Well, I think for so many years, and even I think it just stays as an undertone in American culture, that the sanctuary happens and it's an expectation that everything is going to be set and done well for the adults. And then kids ministry is just kind of a supplement to that. That's not my attitude. It's never been my attitude. I want the same level of excellence, if not more, because we're handling the pride and joy of the families that we want to go to church. And that requires well-trained, well-cared for volunteers. And you know that the face of your volunteers is going to be what calls those families to come back. And people who feel unappreciated, people who feel underutilized or equipped or underempowered, they're not going to have a very nice face, just to be really honest. And even sometimes when they're just sitting in the wrong seat of the bus, they're not going to have the nicest face. And so we have learned that, yes, we all serve in the kingdom, but there is something about taking on the idea that we are serving a congregation that some of them don't feed themselves. Some of them don't go potty by themselves. It's a different level of work and kingdom work. And my volunteers are, I often call them matchsticks, because they are lighting the fire of the next generation's faith. And I've got to have them in their best form. And if that is my best team, I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to feed them. I'm going to love on them. I'm going to pray with them and for them. So on a weekly basis, appreciation sometimes just look like circling up in a circle before a service and finding out what's going on in one another's lives and realizing that they have their own families and their own kids, and how can we pray for you and how can we celebrate you. and wrapping yourselves around them. It really will determine the health of your ministry. The health of your ministry is not necessarily found in your kids. It is found in your leaders, because your leaders are the ones with the kids. And if their temperature isn't right, it's going to rub off on everyone in the room, down to you as a leader. So it's definitely important.
Before this year, maybe, or even in past years when you were at other churches, did you have like a specific volunteer appreciation strategy? Like you even mentioned the dollars earlier for different things, and here's what you're going. So that's obviously been thought of as part of a strategy. Is that like, what is it now? Maybe what was it before? What would you encourage people in terms of looking at not just a one event or one idea or one gift, but and looking at it like, what's the whole strategy? Mixing the big thing with the thing you just talked about, where you're encouraging people weekly. Like, what do you think a good strategy looks like?
Good strategy looks like there's kind of 4 rules that I follow when it comes to volunteer appreciation. The first one is that they need to know it's about them. If you invite them somewhere and they leave going, oh, I thought that was a training, or I thought that was this, or I thought it was that, then it didn't really execute what you thought it was going to execute. So make sure that they know it's about them. The second thing is make sure it accommodates their family. There's nothing like inviting someone to a volunteer appreciation that they have to get a babysitter for. So if your budget is really small, that could look like a family barbecue. Go get some hot dogs and hamburgers and set up some games in a park on a beautiful day and put out lawn chairs and whatever, and just invite them to be with one another and bring their kids. It doesn't always have to exclude the kids. For ours, we opted to have on-site childcare. They could still get a babysitter if they wanted to, but the whole family could be on campus if they needed to. So it's about them. It's that. The third one is that it can be replicated. You don't want to do something so big that you're never going to be able to create it again. It can be, you know what I mean, created at different levels. And yeah, so that you can duplicate it.
Yeah.
And then the last one is that it lets them see a little bit of where they've come from. The biggest thing I've ever heard from leaders is that they don't, when a leader is unhappy, they're usually unhappy for one of 2 reasons. Either they're sitting in the wrong seat of the bus, or there's some kind of like lack of either appreciation or empowerment. We often will take people who are administrators of elementary schools and we put them in a classroom with a pre-supplied bucket of stuff to do. And all of their talents now get thrown on the back seat because you've told them exactly how to do this ministry. And when you take the time to let them live into their giftings a little bit and put their own touch on it and then celebrate it, I mean, there's just something about that full circle that I think we experience in the pastoral ministry. And sometimes we forget to let the lay people experience that too.
Mm-hmm. Any other like tips or small things you all do to appreciate volunteers, or maybe you've thought about that might be on the radar in the future?
We are big advocates of singing happy birthday. Nobody,
like in a restaurant?
Kind of, yeah. Nobody should ever care how old you are, if you are 92 or if you are 9. If it is your birthday week and you are in our huddle, we are going to sing to you and there will probably be a cupcake. We send out, so I have my one of my admins pull 5 random names a week for me of volunteers, and she just puts an address label on a card, and I get to stop and write just a handwritten thank you note. The goal is to get one to every volunteer throughout the year. So little touches like that don't cost a whole lot. They really are just heart work, go a long way.
Yeah, I've always found people, especially with notes, seem to remember that, for a long time. Our executive pastor one year sent custom Christmas cards. There's actually a picture of one of our Christmas services from the previous year to all the staff spouses and wrote a note. And, for weeks, months, maybe even, they would still come back and and mention that. And there's just something about how that sticks. And the great thing is, see, a lot of people are probably like me, writing notes is hard. It's not something you love. And so it really has to be like a discipline. But it is affordable. It is cheap. So if you're looking for those, affordable ideas for volunteer appreciation, do you now that you've done this big thing, it sounds like you're going to do it again. You can keep making those awards. Do you feel like the next year is going to be at keeping that, mixing in some of these small things, and that'll be your strategy essentially, maybe going forward?
Yeah, that'll be our strategy. The other area that you asked about, little things that we do to appreciate them. The way we equip them is a big deal. So our Summer Blast volunteers spend a 4-hour run. It's basically our VBS with kids. So when they come, we of course give them their T-shirt. We've opted to pay a few cents more and get them the really soft shirt. We provide them with a backpack and a water bottle, stuff like that just makes serving in our ministry a little bit easier, a little more fun. And then they're walking logos for us, stuff like that. Those are little touches we do, but we will maintain the one big thing a year.
Mm-hmm. Do kids pay to participate in Summer Blast there? Like, when they sign up for VBS, or is it free, or like, what does that look like? Because I wonder, sometimes people feel like, we can't afford to do some of those things. But then in the end, they forget that sometimes you're asking people to pay, and a couple bucks more per kid here, creates such a better experience for your volunteers there,
Yeah, no, we are a completely free program. And so from 4 years old to 5th grade, we'll see about 2,200 kids on our campus, and it's all free.
And so it's a big budget then. I would imagine it's a big budget line for the year, I would think.
It is. It's a big budget. And we have some people in our church that are passionate about the fact that 2,200 kids hear the gospel that week. And so we have people in our church that will send in gifts that are specific to Summer Blast. And so that's been a huge blessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts you'd share about appreciating volunteers, or maybe even, just transitioning to a new church before we wrap up?
Transitioning to a new church, and I hope it's like, can I share a book title? Is that okay?
Of course. That's great. We love resources.
My son just graduated with his bachelor's, and I was like, you need to read this book now before you step into the new world. But there's a book called The First 90 Days. If you are transitioning into any work, it's not a Christian book, but it talks about low-hanging fruit. And it basically takes people like me. I'm a person that you have to keep reins on, because I tend to run faster than the organization. It helps me slow down and really look at the deeper culture of what matters, and that will help you transition well. If you can learn what low-hanging fruit is and begin to go for that first, you will win some friends. So that's probably my first when you're talking about transitions. And then the other piece with, did you say appreciation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. The other piece with appreciation is, when I 25 years ago, when I stepped into my first church, I had a whopping 3 kids in my ministry and 0 budget. And what I have learned is people love people who serve kids, and never be afraid to ask for someone to help you appreciate them. At one point, I even walked into a family business and explained what I was doing for my volunteers and how I would love to raffle something off. And I think I was trying to get like a hotel stay or something like that. And the guy looked at me and he goes, "How would you feel about raffling off a car?" And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And he had this like vintage Mercedes, I think it was, and he donated it to our ministry. And of course he got a tax benefit from it, but people are all about that kind of stuff. So if you're sitting here and you're listening to this podcast and you're like, well, you're talking about something that looks like the Emmys, I could never execute that. You don't have to. And if you wanted to, you probably could, but don't ever be afraid to ask for help. And then don't ever underestimate the value of kind words. We live in a world that is full of opinions. And I will tell you this, I'm at a church of over 10,000 people. And the sweetest thing I've gotten in the last 3 weeks is a handwritten card from someone who had a blast at our volunteer appreciation. It is It is the power of someone just stopping to look someone else in the eye and say, what you do matters. You're telling kids about Jesus. I know it's not always simple. I know it's not easy. Sometimes we have full rooms. But if you're taking the time to truly communicate the value of them, and then you're empowering them with their gifts, you're going to appreciate them more than you probably even know.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good way to wrap up. How can we'll link to that book in the show notes, but how can people connect with you, and we can link some things there too?
Yeah, so I have a blog at HeidiMHensley.com. It has been a little slow and go since I've been at Shadow Mountain, but I am getting back to writing, and so it's active again. The reason I reference that is obviously to invite you, but there's a contact form on there that you can get a hold of me through. And then there's also under resources, everything I create for ministry down to my policy handbook, I share on there. I'm not a copyrighted person, and I just like to create good stuff for ministry. So if it's useful for you and you're at a place that you don't have those resources, feel free to download them. And then I'm on social media too. Heidi M. Hensley is where you can find me just about anywhere.
All right. Well, you have to tell Jason, I'm going to need to reach out and get him on the podcast. We'll talk security, and that'd be a really good thing. I think it would really be helpful. I think I've maybe had it's only been one podcast that I've had in the last 3+ years that have been about that, but it's something that's so important. I mean, I could have had 5 by now, so we should make that happen. So we'll figure that out. But thanks for coming back on the podcast and for, sharing about your transition. Lots of people, making transitions maybe to a new place. I think that'll be really helpful. And I think all of us could appreciate volunteers better. So that's certainly helpful. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, that was the second time we've had Heidi on the podcast. Always a great interview. I encourage you to go back and listen to the previous episode that she was on. A few of the action items I thought of coming out of that interview. 1, write 5 notes to volunteers. I mean, if you're like me, that's not something you love doing. I don't like writing, period. I could have been born a lot later, like in this generation where there's so much on your phone and computers and stuff like that. You don't have to learn cursive. I mean, I would have loved being a student going through school at this time that we're in now, because I don't like writing anything by hand. But even if you're like me, it's so important. It means so much. Don't worry if your handwriting's awful like mine. Write 5 notes this week. Another action step would be to hold an event. It's time that you could do that again. And they don't have to be huge. It could be smaller ones, but hold an event to appreciate your volunteers. And then, especially if you're new in your role, check out the First 90 Days book that she referenced there. That'd be really helpful. You can get all the links and notes at nickblevins.com/episode 241. If you're interested in Clearstream texting service, go to nickblevins.com/text to check that out. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these episodes. And we'll be back next week with another interview that I recorded before the pandemic, but is still helpful now. See you then.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.